So what do you think is, first of all, what do you think is the age, if there is a particular age when normally the decline starts, and what is your idea on that?
Yeah, the decline probably starts sometime around age 35. That's when we begin to see
I'm
changes taking
gone.
place.
Bye. Hello, everyone. Here it is Simon Gergolet and Mattia Gaffuri from GoOff and CiclismoKOMpetente with a very special guest, Joe Friel, which is, in my opinion, a god. Because I seen the background of the camera Training Bible. That book, for my idea, is maybe on the same level as the Holy Bible, maybe a little bit higher, but that is more or less my idea about him. And hi, Joe. Hi, Mattia.
Hi, Simon. How are you doing? Hi, Mattia. Just so you know, I'm actually, that book is now getting a little bit on the old side. It came out in 2018, this book over here. And I'm in the process of writing a brand new book. Unfortunately, it probably won't be out until the end of next year, but I'm trying to bring everything up to date.
So we should expect the New Testament after the Old Testament from a religious point of view.
Another version of the 10 anyway.
So we are hoping today to make a conversation about you, about your experience, about your vision, about your opinions, because a lot of people cycle indoor and a lot of people like to hear something on the podcast. And we, me and Mattia, as coaches and in general as bike enthusiasts, have a lot of questions for you, a lot of points that we would like to discuss and get to know your opinion.
I'll try to answer. I hope we can move through this fairly easily.
Yeah, no, I mean, we usually keep a very friendly approach. So the most important question that we would like to make you is, how many bikes do you have?
How many bikes do I have? Well, I've got a garage full. I was just out there just a few minutes ago when I realized I had a little bit of extra time. I had to make some adjustments to my wife's bike, put new pedals on it. And so I was just doing that. I didn't count my bikes, but I think I'm in the neighborhood of about, in this garage, about 8 bikes, I think, right now are in there, if I recall right.
Starting from this number, I mean, it shows already that you're very deep in the cycling world. So we would like to ask you for a brief introduction about yourself, for maybe the people who don't know you,
Sure.
But in general.
Yeah. Well, that's hard to, I'll try to keep as brief as I can. I mean, you're old as I am, you got a lot of stuff you could talk about. So let's just kind of get the high points here. I started coaching young athletes, high school athletes, track and field back in the 1970s, early 1970s. I was a runner in junior high, high school, and college back in the 1950s, 1960s. And so I brought that with me into my coaching and just was coaching runners. And in 1980, I opened a running store in the little town I lived in. It's a very small town. It was probably I think it was the 5th running store ever opened in the United States. At that time, if you wanted to buy running equipment, you had to go to a general sporting goods store to buy it. So I had one of the very first running stores, 1980, and then I began to play around with triathlon, found I liked it. Then because of now riding a bike and running and swimming, I decided to try my hand at some bike races and enjoyed that also. So I was starting to do all kinds of racing. I was, running races, triathlons, bike races, and I was enjoying all of it. And so fine, but so many people kept coming to me asking for advice on how to train for their sport, any one of those 3 sports, that I finally decided to sell my store. That was 1987, just start coaching. At that time, I didn't know of any other coaches, freelance coaches in the country. I didn't know of any at all in the US. There may have been some in Europe I wasn't aware of. As far as I could tell, I was the first one in the US to start coaching freelance. And so I began coaching. It was hard to make money when I started. It was very difficult. So I had 2 other jobs on the side to bring in some money while I was trying to get my coaching business going. Finally, that happened in the early 1990s, 1992, I think I could mark as kind of at the point where I was pretty much on board to make the career work. And then I was asked to write a book. I turned it down, didn't have time. That was about the same time, 1993. Then I came down with a heart condition in 1994, brought on by birds in Australia. I got a virus from them that settled in my heart. And so I was told not to ride or run or swim or do anything for the next 9 months. So all of a sudden I had lots of time on my hands. So I contacted the publisher and said, okay, I'll write that book you asked me about. That first book was the Cyclist Training Bible. That was the first book I wrote. That was 1996. And then the whole story. There's been lots of books since then. And I coached until about 2012 and finally decided to leave coaching and just and kind of enjoy life and also write more books. So now I've written 17 books. I'm working on my 18th book right now, which will be about a year away, a cycling book. So that kind of in a nutshell is where I've been over the last, 50 years, I guess.
Well, that's a lot of story.
It is a lot of stuff.
So you first started training for running, actually, and then you shifted to triathlon and cycling, right?
Right. My son was a cyclist.
Oh, okay.
And he started when he was 12 years old. So that was 1982. He started racing as a junior. And so I was riding already because of triathlon, but I started going to his races and I began to realize I should try some bike races myself. So that's when I took up bike racing on top of everything else.
With a history of about 30, 35, 40 years in training, what were the biggest evolutions that you saw during the coaching career? I mean, what do you think also that in through the years impacted the way people train the most?
Yeah, I think the biggest change I've seen is really just data capture. That's unbelievably huge right now compared to when I first started as a runner. Realize again, I started when I was a junior myself back in the 1950s, late 1950s. I was running. We didn't even have stopwatches. Only the coach had a stopwatch. The first stopwatch came out in about 1971, and that was the first time I ever saw data that wasn't coming from a coach. It was my own data on my own wrist. So that was where it started in 1971. Then 1977, the heart rate monitor was invented in Finland. And 1982, I got my first polar heart rate monitor and began to try to figure it out. And for 2 sports, because now I was doing both sports, triathlon and road cycling and running. And so I was trying to figure out heart rate for that. And then in 1987, the first power meter was invented. And so 1993, SRM, the manufacturer, loaned me a power meter to try out so I could write my first book. I guess it was 1994. And so I began to use power meters, and then it's just exploded since then. By the time we were into the early 2000s, it was just unbelievable the amount of data we were collecting.
But we are also saying this way that after 1987, 1993, I don't remember the year, there is nothing new anymore. Because you stopped citing after power meter. That was the big difference. Or am I missing something?
No, I didn't stop writing at all. In fact, I became much more serious about my writing. I'm not going into all the stories, the problems in my life, but I had to finally give up swimming.
No. Sorry, maybe I was I was not understood well. I meant that the biggest hardware change from the training perspective was the introduction of the power meter, and since then we don't have something as big as a power meter, something that made this big of a change.
The power meter certainly was a gigantic change, but there are so many anymore. They're not nearly as big as a power meter. Power meter is still, for cycling, is still numero uno. That's the one that is the big one. That's where we get most all of our data from for a cyclist. Not so for a runner or a swimmer, but for a cyclist, it is the biggest challenge. In fact, cycling went from, back in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, cycling was the least scientific sport there was in the world as far as endurance sports were concerned. It was strictly the seat of your pants. How did you feel? What was going to make you a better cyclist? And the answer was just ride your bike more. That was the whole answer back in those days. Then the power meter came out, and now because of that, cycling became the most scientific sport in the world. There's nothing even close to it anymore. So now we've got tremendous amounts of data. We're overwhelmed with data, and it's not just the power meter, it's not just the heart rate monitor, it's also the wearable stuff, all the little things, the wristwatch and the continuous glucose monitor you can wear on your arm and et cetera. We're overwhelmed with data now.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think maybe we don't realize how lucky we are as cyclists to have the power meter device. Because, for example, I have a lot of friends who are cross-country skier, and when I talk about training with them, it's crazy how let's say not scientific they are in the training, because they only have the heart rate monitor. They cannot even base on pace as for running, because the snow changes so much. So it's crazy how lucky we are. But yeah, something I wanted to ask you, because I heard in a podcast you recorded with I think it was a coachcast with TrainingPeaks, that you used to write down the abstract of some studies in a library, and that you had this habit about writing down the abstracts. Am I right? From the books, something like that.
Yeah, in fact, I keep a stack of cards right here next to my desk.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm now, back when I first started doing that, this is the early 1980s, I had to go to the college library, which is right next to my running store, to get access to research. And it was a very tedious job trying to find research studies and so forth. And so that's changed tremendously now. So, every day I'm finding research studies I want to read. And so I keep this pile of cards right here so I can make notes about what I'm reading. It's an amazing world today.
Yeah, exactly. My question was with the evolution of the availability of the information, and also the artificial intelligence, which is growing and everything. How do you think the figure of the coach will develop in the future?
Yeah, I just finished off a 2.5-year project trying to answer that question. I did an online program called The Craft of Coaching. And the intent was to try to take my experience and put it into videos and recordings and lectures and discussions with other coaches and roundtable discussions and all kinds of stuff to explain what I've learned over the years. And coaches are now in a unique situation. It's very, very difficult to get started. When I started, I was the only coach I knew of in the United States. I didn't find out about another coach until 1989. It was the next time I heard about another coach in the country. There may have been some outside of the US. But now there are thousands of coaches, thousands. And so it's much more competitive now than when I first started. It wasn't easy when I first started because nobody thought they needed a coach. But today, people realize that coaching will help them. However, you've still got to convince people to pay the money. It's very difficult to make any money as a coach. Unfortunately, coaches don't charge enough, so consequently they wind up not really getting their full value out of their career, their experience. So there's been so much that's changed about coaching. The one thing I think is going to change with artificial intelligence is that I think what's really going to happen is coaches are going to change the way they operate. There are a lot of coaches right now who are creating training plans, and that's how they make their living, is creating training plans and selling those online. That's going to change because AI can do a much better job of that than the individual can. AI can ask questions of the user, and within a matter of seconds have the workout plan developed for the athlete. So that's going to change. Coaches are going to stop doing that and simply go more into one-on-one coaching. One-on-one coaching is much more unique than training plans. One-on-one coaching requires that you get to know the athlete gets to know you. It's not searching online to find out information. It's actually trying to ask questions of a real human being and find out what's going on in their head, listening to them, watching them as you're talking with them, like on Zoom as we're doing right now, or face-to-face. And so that's going to change. Coaches are going to become much better at working with individuals than they are at creating training plans. The second thing that's going to change, I think, is that right now, what coaches, one of the biggest problems for coaches is being able to interpret all the data they get from an athlete's workout. Artificial intelligence can do that very easily. So the coaches will start using artificial intelligence as an assistant coach. Read all the data and tell me what's going on. And within a matter of seconds, you can have the information back to the coach and what's going on with this particular athlete, and save the athlete or save the coach perhaps an hour or more of digging through data, trying to realize what's going on. So it's going to save the coach an awful lot of time. And then the coach is going to say to AI, using my methodology, my philosophy of coaching, create the next 2 weeks of this athlete's training plan, or the next week of this athlete's training plan, how the coach wants to do it. And within a matter of seconds, they will have that back from artificial intelligence using the coach's method of coaching and the coach's ways of dealing with the athlete, talking to the athlete. It'll all be there in writing. But now what the coach has to do is go through it and make sure everything is really the way they want it. So they're going to edit it to make it right for the athlete. Then that the coach will send that program to the athlete, and the athlete's ready to train again. So we've got this endless circle going here of the coach using AI to help them solve problems, which is number one, a time problem. Number one issue is trying to read data. Number two is trying to create a plan based on that data, and the coach can use AI to speed up that entire process. Will AI ever be as good as a real coach? I don't know, but right now it's not. It's not the same place as a real coach is.
Yeah, if I may comment on this now, on how I see it. I see that compared to the past, doing threshold intervals 3, 4, 6 times per 10 minutes. I mean, we are at a point where everyone knows what these things are, and there could be no need for a coach in finding workouts. What I think, however, that is crucial in the relationship between the coach and the athlete is exactly the relationship. So finding a solution when things go off the track, because if everything goes according to a track, there is no need for a coach. You have a workout schedule. You have maybe the AI that can give the feedback to the athlete. So actually, there shouldn't be any problem. If a person wants to do this on their own, they could do it. Where I see the problem is the motivation point of view, and let's say the human part, not the knowledge. The knowledge nowadays, or especially in the last 5 to 10 years, has grown incredibly, in my opinion. And the availability of information, of scientific papers, is enormous. How do you interpret this, and how do you apply this to someone? Is the key point, in my opinion, of what is going to be the evolution of coaches. Getting to know the person that you're coaching, understanding what can have an impact, and understand also what will not have an impact.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. The coaching is all about people.
Yeah.
It's not about computers. It's about people. If I'm talking with you and I can see your face right now, I can see your eyes, I can hear the tone of your voice, I get some idea of what's going on without you saying a word. I've got a pretty good idea of what's happening between your ears and how what I'm saying is being responded to. that's the one thing that AI can't do. It doesn't have that capability yet. It may someday, but right now it doesn't have that capability. So coaching is very nuanced. There are a lot of details going into making a decision about what this athlete should be doing in their training that can't be deciphered in terms of words. Just a lot of it's deciphered in terms of body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, all kinds of stuff that humans are very good at doing, but AI is not good at all at doing right now anyway.
Probably also the part of mental coaching, which is probably a field that is developing very fast and across many sports, is something that will have a parallel life to the coaching as we see it from the past. Because we mentioned data, we have really a lot of data now. We have the stopwatch, we have the heart rate, we have the power meter, we have maybe a lot of other things. We have the hours of sleep, we have the grams of carbs in every gel, we have the glucose monitor, which is very interesting. We have the muscle oxygenation monitors, lactate measurements, quality of sleep measurements, HRV, a lot of things. But probably we are reaching a point where we need to make a selection on what to use, because put it very simple, would you change the scheduled training plan based on how many grams did a person eat in the previous 12 hours or not? Sometimes the answer might be yes, sometimes it might be no, but also for some people might be yes, for some people might be no. If a person trains 4 to 6 hours per week, or if that person trains 20 to 25 hours, you will probably have to look at different sources of data. My question here is, what do you think is too much information? What would you exclude from consideration? What instead, from your experience in the past and from your vision about the future, is key to consider in every day and during the weeks and during the months?
Yeah, good question. You obviously cannot look at all the data for every workout for every athlete. You spend with all the data we have anymore, and it's going to become even more than that. What I think we'll see next, mentioning CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, that's going to become a lactate, something similar. That's going to become a lactate measuring device real time. So the athlete will be able to see, and the coach will be able to see the data post-workout, perhaps even real time during the workout, what's going on with the athlete's lactate level during the workout, during the race. It'll be very, very similar to CGM. It'll be a device that is perhaps put onto the back of the arm like the CGM is. And in the interstitial space between the skin and the muscle, it can determine what the lactate level is.
The CGM, let's clarify, is the glucose monitor, right?
Yes, right. Continuous glucose monitor. So the lactate monitor will be something very similar to that. It'll be a continuous lactate monitor, and it'll give us information we've not seen before. And again, very, very valuable information. So, but you started off with the question of what do we do with this athlete who's not eaten enough, apparently. Should they do the workouts or not? And you mentioned it has a lot to do with their volume, if the athlete's training 25 hours a week or 5 hours a week. It's a big difference between those two. And I agree with you 100% that it's the sort of thing that a coach has to make a decision about based on what they know about the athlete, what they can do with the athlete between now and when they do their workout for the day. It sounds to me like there'd be a need for a phone call at that point to talk about their diet and what they should do about their training, as opposed to making a decision without having talked with the athlete. That's what we were talking about earlier, that coaching is a person-to-person business, is what it's all about. It's about communication. It's not about one-way ordering what the athletes to do something such and such because the coach thinks that's right. You've got to find out, first of all, what's going on from the athlete's perspective. And there may be something that we don't know about. Maybe the athlete has other problems besides not getting enough nutrition. Maybe the athlete is going through a divorce with their spouse. And that's a bigger problem than not getting enough food in the last 12 hours or whatever it may be. But this is the sort of thing you've got to find out the answers to and then draw conclusions based on that. It's a tricky situation. It's not easy to come up with what to do, but that's why you're a coach. That's why you're working with athletes, is because you're trying to make a profession out of doing that exact thing, which is to make decisions about athletes and what they should or should not be doing.
Yeah, as we're talking about devices, I have one of the questions that I was thinking about asking you, as let's say one of the first users of the power meter. I think we can say that like sometimes we get really obsessed with the power data, but we forget that there is an instrument error, and also there are differences between different power meters. And of course, it's like we cannot know what is the real power data if, let's say, one power meter says 10 watts higher than another one. And I guess that in the past, when the first power meter were used, probably the difference were even higher. So I wanted to ask, how did you deal with that? For example, when you started coaching athletes that had some power meters, and I don't know, maybe sometimes the power data were different than another day. Maybe it was not calibrated right or something like that. What is your experience with that?
Yeah, probably the one that stands out most for me was some years ago. I had an athlete who had a lot of money, and he had 3 bicycles, all very, very nice bikes. Each one had its own power meter. They were all from the same company, by the way. They were all, if I recall right, SRMs. But they didn't agree. It was obvious that if he rode bike number 1 and did a workout, he would not get the same data from bike number 2 on the very same workout. There would be significant differences. And so that was very, very confusing. So he had to tell me every day which bicycle it was he had done that workout on, so I could draw conclusions about what the data meant. So we had different, for example, different functional thresholds for each bike.
Yeah.
And so I had to go through that every time and try to determine what the data meant from that bike. That was a major problem to deal with. If I'd had an AI at that time, I would have really enjoyed it, because that would save me a tremendous amount of time. But that's the sort of thing you have to deal with all the time. But what you have to do is you have to individualize it. You can't draw conclusions about an athlete just because you have an FTP. You cannot draw conclusions about what, for example, what their power zones should be. You really need more data than that. So I would look at not just an FTP test, but perhaps multiple FTP tests over a period of time. And along the way, you're refining the data you have on the athlete. And we also may be using other tools like lactate to determine where the athlete is right now in terms of their threshold power. And so we've got much more available to us now. This is a good time to be using all that data to do a better job of coaching the athlete to perform at a higher level.
But do you think that a piece of information like the lactate levels is an information that is required for the athlete or for the coach? Because as I see it, it's required for the coach to address the athlete. And for the athletes, it's more or less, nice to know, but that's it.
I understand. Yeah, I've been there too. I would, if I had a choice, if I could design the perfect athlete to be coached, I would want somebody who would glance at the data and say, that's interesting, and then go on with the rest of his life that day, as opposed to the athlete who sits down with the computer and starts digging through the data and takes as long to analyze the data as it did to do the workout. Given that choice, I'll take the person who just glances at it and then turns it over to me to do the actual decision making. That's much better. I really don't like working with athletes who are really into understanding the numbers. It's okay if they understand them, but I really don't want them to spend a lot of time trying to evaluate how they're doing and what's going on. It's mostly a waste of time, and mostly just leads to more problems down the road for both the coach and the athlete if you have that situation going on.
There's also an issue of faith in each other, right? In this thing, because if the athlete goes to reinterpret the data that he has, maybe he has a view that is different, and in case something goes wrong, I told you, I knew that this was going to happen. I had a different feeling. You made me do something that isn't right. Did you ever experience this kind of things where athletes were controversial?
Yeah. Yeah, I've certainly experienced that. I prefer the athletes who wouldn't get all involved in the details, but if they experience something that they believe is wrong, they need to tell me about that. If there's something about the training plan, something about what I had them do, something about the data, the way I interpret it that they don't agree with, I want to know the answer of what they're thinking also. And we need to have a conversation about what that means. You really can't have a relationship that's a strong coach-athlete relationship if you disagree about things. So we've got to get it out in the open and talk about it. But again, I've been there. I've had to coach the athlete who wants to really dig into the data. But what I do when I was coaching was I would screen my clients before I'd start coaching them. I want to find out who this person is. And one of the things I wanted to find out was how dedicated are they to data? How deeply into evaluation, assessment of workouts are they? And I would tend to move away if I had a choice. And one athlete is really overly into his data, and the other athlete is like interested but doesn't go beyond that. I prefer the second athlete. So screening the athlete from the coach's perspective really saves a lot of problems down the line in many ways. It's not just this data. I mean, there's all kinds of things you need to screen athletes for. That's just one minor one, actually.
Yeah, makes sense. Now I wanted to ask you about a topic which is not so good to talk about, but I think it's important, and it's about doping. First, I wanted to ask if you had any experience with athletes that you were coaching and that it turned out they were doping, and if you could see it from, I don't know, maybe some spikes in the power data or something. And then as a follow-up question, if you think that the biological passport of the pro cyclist, it could be, let's say, implemented with some power data from races as a way to, let's say, to find out if there are some anomalies or something.
Yeah, that's a great question. We saw this tremendously back in the 1990s and early 2000s. There was just this we were being overwhelmed with athletes using illegal drugs to improve their performance. We still have some of that going on, but it's not nearly what it was back then, at least in my opinion. But you asked, did I have any experience with this? And I would say not that I'm aware of. I don't know of any athlete I've ever coached who's ever been using any type of a drug. They've never tested positive. They've never said anything to me that implied there was something going on. Their data never indicated there was something unusual happening. This has never occurred. And I think it's probably because one thing for me is that I'm very concerned about that matter. That's a big issue for me is an athlete cheating. And so when I go through the process of trying to screen out athletes I will coach, I ask questions. I don't come out and ask the question right out. Are you using any performance enhancing drugs? I don't ask that question, but I start asking questions around that issue, trying to get to the point of, are they the type of person who might use that sort of stuff, might do that? And I've never quite honestly had one I had to reject because of those questions, but that was always in the back of my mind, especially again the 1990s and early 2000s for cycling. That was always in the back of my mind. Not that triathletes and runners didn't have some of that going on also, but it was really evident in cycling back in the early 2000s especially. So my challenge here was always to make sure I never wound up coaching any of those athletes who I thought might be prone to use performance enhancing drugs.
On the athlete's point of view, or in general on athletes that you coach, what were the main differences that you saw in previous years and also in recent years and now and the latest years between amateurs and pro level, in this case, cyclists? It can be physical, it can be in terms of performance, of attitude that they had, attributes, whatever, in your opinion, was the big difference between the two.
I think what you're asking, correct me if I'm wrong, is what's the major differences between elite athletes and those who are not yet elite or
yeah,
not elite.
but if it is only on the performance side, or if you saw something big also from the, let's say, psychological side or attitude.
Oh yeah.
I think this is interesting for Mattia because he's trying to make the step.
Yeah.
I understand. Yeah, one thing I would look for in an athlete who is expressing interest in moving up to professional level, training at an elite level, is there's obviously physiological things you have to check for. You have to know, like, do they have the aerobic capacity? Do they have, can they handle the volume that elite athletes can handle? Can they do those things? Those are, there's lots of physiological matters, but there's also some very psychological things too that are going on for the athlete. I would like to know, for example, when I'm talking with such an athlete, well, how about their what's their motivation like? I want to dig back into their motivation. That's a starting level for all of this. It's not going to be easy. What's going to happen when they make this decision to turn pro is all of a sudden they're going to have very little money and somebody who's running their life for them on what they're doing as far as training and racing, etc. All these things are going to change dramatically. How likely is this athlete to be able to go along with those things? Some athletes are very good at that. I coached one athlete. He was a triathlete. He was in the Olympics back in 2000. And he was just an amazing athlete. He had this tremendous level of motivation. Even when he experienced setbacks, he took them he just rolled with the punches. He never had anything negative. He was always positive and happy about where things were going. And he did exactly what he said he was going to do every time. He achieved at the very, very highest level. He was probably the best athlete I've ever coached, mentally and physiologically. Also, he was a tremendous athlete. He had some more problems physiologically than he did mentally. But mentally, he was a tremendous athlete to coach. I've had nobody else even came close to him in all the years. I've had other athletes. I had a woman cyclist, for example, back about the same time, who was dealing with all kinds of issues going on between her ears. She just had this, in fact, I wasn't so much her coach as her psychologist. I spent more time dealing with her mental issues than I did with her physiological issues. And it worked. I finally found things that helped her, what worked for her. She wound up that year winning the National Time Trial Championship in the United States and went to the World Championships where she finished 5th in time trial, which was the best finish by any American that year, any American woman. And it was, but it was just the opposite of this other triathlete I was coaching. She just was, every day I was dealing with something that was going on that was happening in her psychological life. And it wasn't easy. It was probably the hardest job of coaching I ever had, but she had tremendous talent. The problem was trying to convince her that she had the talent. She just didn't believe in herself. And so I brought in other people. I'm not an expert on psychology, so I brought in another guy who is degree in psychology, worked with some athletes back then. And he gave me ideas on things I could be doing to help the athlete. And the stuff he gave me was very powerful. It worked. So we finally got over that. And by the end of the season, after all this trouble, not believing she could do anything. In fact, even when she won the national championship, she still believed she shouldn't have won. That the person who came in second should have beaten her. She just did not believe in herself at all. And I had to try to convince her that, this is something you did. You pulled this off all by yourself. And she would not accept it. That was about August. And by October, when her season was over after World Championships, that year, I could see things were improving. So I was talking to her on the phone after her last race of the year, which was Worlds. And I asked her something along the lines of I think she asked me, what was I thinking about for the coming year for her? No, I'll take it back. I asked her, what do you think about for the coming year? And what she said was, she was thinking about going after the hour record on the track. She was a tremendous time trialist, tremendous athlete. And so I replied, yeah, interestingly enough, I had just looked at the American record for that a couple of days ago, and I think you could break that American record. And she said, oh, no, not the American record. I want to break the world's record. This was, at the time, that was Jeannie Longo's record. And she thought she could break that record, which maybe she could. She never got the chance, a long story short, but she never got the chance to do it. But she says she went from not even believing in herself at all, right up to the time of the World Championship, that she didn't believe in herself. And within a few days later, everything had changed in her way of seeing the world, and she now believes she could break the world's record for the hour. So it was a tremendous change that took place in her. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to coach her the following year because she was picked up by the biggest women's team of the day. This is late 90s, early 2000s. And they ran her into the ground. They raced her all the time, and she never had any energy left. And they provided her coach also. So I didn't coach her anymore, but that was kind of the end of her experience of being an elite athlete, was after she changed to a new team.
Yeah, great story. Now, Joe, I wanted to ask you about age, which I think is one of the biggest concern for amateur athletes. And sometimes it can also, let's say, become a sort of an excuse, because a lot of amateurs, let's say, stop working on when they are maybe 40, 45, because they say, okay, now with age I will only get worse. So what do you think is, first of all, what do you think is the age, if there is a particular age when normally the decline starts? And what is your idea on that?
Yeah, the decline probably starts sometime around age 35. That's when we begin to see changes taking place.
Bye-bye.
Adios.
It's over.
That's physiologically, that's when we begin to see changes taking place. Plus or minus 2 years, but 35 is kind of the number. However, I should point out something here. You don't always see performance decline, even though VO2 max is declining with that athlete, because by age 35, this athlete who's been out racing now for a few years has learned how to race, learned how to train, has become much more mentally acute. And because of that, the athlete can maintain their performance beyond age 35. And we see it all the time. Who was it? I forgot his name. American won the Vuelta at age 40.
Horner. Chris Horner.
Chris Horner. Yeah, sorry, I forgot his name. But he won at age 40. He won because he wasn't really willing to accept that he was going downhill. He still believed he could do things, and he could. It was obvious he could still do it. So he held in there. So I think he's probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest, Grand Tour winners of all time. There may be somebody back in the 1920s or something I'm not aware of, but he was probably the king of this, of hanging on for a long time. So you can do it. You can even though aerobic capacity, lactate threshold, and other things are going downhill, just because you're smarter, you can race better, train better, and have a better performances in races just because of that. However, once we get beyond about age 40, even that begins to show some problems for you. Most athletes are no longer able to do all the things they could do when they were in their early 30s by the time they're in their 40s, even if they were somebody who, like Horner, was able to maintain their performance because they were so well-informed, so smart anymore. So it starts to go downhill, and it goes downhill at a rate. The rate is about 7%. This is just VO2 max, by the way, which is one of the key determiners of performance. VO2 max goes down about 7% per decade as the athlete ages. So this athlete is now 45 years old, has got probably 7% less VO2 max than he or she had at age 35. And that rate is going to continue if they train consistently. If they don't train consistently, the number changes. It becomes 9%, 10%, or worse. If you stop riding, 15% per decade. So the key to maintain performance after aging, whatever the age may be, is consistency. You've got to get on your bike almost daily. You've got to be out there riding. That's the key. So it is going to go downhill, but you can control how fast it goes downhill.
But I think I will explain how I see this point, and then we'll see if you agree, if you see things very differently, or how. In my opinion, what you are saying is perfectly true for athletes that reach their maximum performance, and at a certain point, their maximum performance is not obtainable anymore. But for the vast majority of people that I see, so on amateur levels, until high or very high amateur levels, what I see is that people, let's say, never reach their true potential. Why this? Because they don't want to dedicate enough time, enough effort to reaching it. So what I want to reach is this. Let's say that a person has a peak potential of 100. By training in a certain way, at 25 years of age, it can reach a level of 80 because it trains, let's say, 14 hours per week, gives a lot of attention to eating, not a lot of attention on the sleep, etc. 10 years after, or 20 years after, at 45, we can say the absolute level of potential of this person is 90. This person has more experience, decided to improve their sleep, improve other things, train from 14 hours per week to 20. I don't think that this person, I think that this person could potentially reach a higher level of performance than it had at 25. Because it can reach probably 88 out of 90 instead of 80 out of 100. Do you think this makes sense, or do you see that in any case it's very unlikely that this person will increase its efforts and its dedication to a sport or to a hobby?
You can start at any time in life. It doesn't matter what the age is. You can start at any age. You can start at age 70, and the athlete will improve. And then improvement will go on if they do the right things. I mean, this doesn't mean occasionally throwing their leg over a bike. It means being out there regularly, consistently, nutrition and everything else. The athlete can improve considerably from where they are at whatever age they start. However, the rate of decline as they age will still be the same thing as before. 7% from wherever they started. It's going to be now 7% if they're very consistent, 10% if they're not consistent, 15% if they keep missing workouts all the time. So everybody can improve once they start. It doesn't matter what the age is. You can start at age 50, never ridden a bike in your life, never trained. You can start at age 50 and you can improve. You can become a much more healthy, much more fit. You can even take up racing and be competitive. I've seen that happen with athletes in their 50s who took up the sport very late in life. Is they became very good because they had just the right genetics. However, they weren't as good as they could have been had they started at, say, age 18 or 17 or whatever. Started at an earlier age, they could have been better, so they lost a lot. However, they can still improve tremendously over what they have been in their previous decades of life when they didn't do anything at all.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And what do you think about just in general the word talent? How much do you think is really genetics, and how much do you think is what you do in the first years of your life? Because from what I've seen in a lot of athletes, it seems like what you do in a really early age can sort of predict let's say, the amount of talent. What do you think about that?
What I tell young athletes to do, when somebody says to me, the person is 15 years, and he or she says to me, I would like to become a pro athlete, pro cyclist. First thing I tell them to do is start reading books about pro cyclists going back in history. Read about Eddie Merckx. How did he get started? What got him into cycling? What did he do when he first started? Look at others right down the line. Look at athletes who have done extremely well in their sports, who are now perhaps older athletes like Merckx, and find out how they got there. What was going on early in their lives that led to them becoming the athlete they are? A lot of it goes on between the athlete's ears. It's not all physiology. Physiology certainly plays a big role. If you've got if your parents and your lineage, your grandparents and so forth, had very poor, let's say, aerobic capacities, there's a good chance you've got a poor aerobic capacity also. So that's going to be a gigantic limiting factor for an athlete coming into the sport, no matter what age they come in. But it can be improved. We don't know how much it can be improved. That's still something we're not really fully aware of, is what, if you start with somebody who's got a very low VO2 max, who's never exercised before, how much can you improve it over time? Even if we think that their lineage was very poor. So, but the first place to start is by getting the head straight. Start out by reading about athletes and what they did when they were young. And another thing to realize is that they didn't all start out by simply being cyclists. They just started at age 14 or 15 riding a bike. Many of them started out doing some other sports. They played football, they cross-country skied, they ran, they did lots of things, including cycling. But by the time they were 18, they gravitated to cycling, and they became very good cyclists, and that became the focus then of their career, was cycling. But they didn't all start out at age 14 riding bikes and trying to race. That was not the way they did it. In fact, the research says that's a very poor way of doing it. The research supports the idea that when you're a teenager, when you're a young person, that you should be doing lots of sports across the board. My son, I mentioned earlier that he raced pro back in the 1980s. When he first started, he did his first bike racing when he was 12 years old, and he fell in love with the sport. He wanted to make it the only thing he did. I told him, I'm your sponsor. I'm the guy who's paying for your bike and your meals and your housing and all this stuff. So here's the deal. The deal is you've got to be in at least one other sport every year besides cycling. It can be anything you want. So he wound up playing football. He wound up swimming. He wound up running track and field. Besides riding his bike, and I told him until he was age 16, he had to have another sport. When you turn 16, you can do that as your only sport. So on his 16th birthday, he came to me and said, "Dad, I don't want to do anything anymore except ride my bike." And I said, "Okay, you're now at the age where it pays off." He went on to race pro. He had a very good career. He still races. He's now 53 years old. He still races. He still does extremely well in his category, and it paid off. But I think had I pushed him to ride the bike when he was 12 years old and made him get outside and ride it, probably would have been a different story altogether.
Very interesting, and I completely agree on this. I would like to talk a little bit, shifting the level a bit lower from pro levels that were a little bit topic of the discussion that we had a lot so far, to lower levels, so amateur levels and, let's say, limitations. So a lot of people have a lot of limitations when they approach cycling. It can be number of hours available for training, it can be overall the level of effort that they want to put in it, availability of sleep, work, financial income, weight, you name it. What are, in your opinion, the key areas that if a person wants to improve, should focus? I give you an example. Let's say I have a guy that wants to do stretching or yoga 2 hours per week because they think that will improve their fitness on the bike. Okay, I'm in a point where I say to this guy, no, do 2 more hours on the bike because you're only doing 6 hours per week on the bike. Yoga, I agree, it's nice. There are papers that can tell you, yeah, yoga is beneficial, but if you have to choose, we need to make some optimization here. Take 2 hours more of bike, or take an hour more on the bike and add an extra hour of sleep or care about your diet. Which areas overall at low levels of performance do you think should be the focus of somebody?
Yeah, you bring up a good one there with the example you gave. That is exactly what the athlete needs to be thinking about is, what are the benefits of going to a yoga class compared to riding your bike for an hour instead? And so it really comes down to what is the athlete's goal? What are we aiming at here? If the athlete is wanting to enter races, then there's no doubt what the right answer is. If the athlete's simply wanting to have fun, and do lots of things in their life, doesn't really care about performance whatsoever, just wants to be healthy and fit, going to yoga is fine. So it really
you're
comes
coming
down
back to the
athlete.
questions, why do you train? Right?
Yeah, why do you train? Yeah, so what we're aiming at is trying to meet the athlete's goal. What is it we're trying to accomplish here? That's then becomes the coach's priority, is making sure we're aimed at the right thing. And that can be a challenge. One time I coached an athlete who I thought I knew the athlete's goal. We never really talked about it. I thought it was pretty apparent. And the athlete had 3 major races that year he wanted to do. He wound up on the podium in all 3 of them. And after the last race, I congratulated him on having a great season, and he was disappointed. He was disappointed because his real goal, which he didn't tell me, was to beat this other guy, and he never beat that guy the entire season. The guy always beat him every time they raced. So he never told me about this, and I never asked. I should have dug into this idea more deeply than what I'd done. So knowing the athlete's goal is critical to what you're trying to accomplish here. When I was coaching, I never really coached people who were just looking to have better fitness, better health, which is fine. I have no problem with that at all. In fact, I think it's great. I wish more people would do that. The only people who came to me were people who wanted to win a national championship, who wanted to be on the podium at a big race they were doing, who wanted to go to worlds. Those are the people I got all the time. And so my world was really focused in a different direction than most coaches, who get a lot more people coming to them wanting just to be more fit and healthier, which again is great. That's fine. I'm not taking anything away from that whatsoever. It just wasn't the people that came to me. So it kind of depends on who you are as a coach and who your clients are, but you've got to know what the goal is.
But would you work as a coach with someone who tells you, I just want to go faster? Because in my opinion, I choose not to train those people. One of the first questions that I ask is, why do you want to train? The answer can be anything for me, but it has to be very strong and consistent. I had a person who just said, I just want to do the Stelvio without stepping down. This person never skipped a training in the last 4 years. It's insane. I love this guy. I mean, it's very low performance from a general level, but he's committed to what he's doing, and he has a goal in mind. He does that, and you improve his life overall. Someone instead who can be also very strong and I just want to go faster without a goal in mind. In my opinion, he will not have the motivation to go on the trainer in the evening at 9 in the evening after a day of work or stuff like that. So the role of the coach there, in my opinion, just vanishes.
Sure. Yeah, I never really coached those people. Those folks never came to me. There could be lots of reasons for that. One, I guess, is that my reputation, people kind of accepted that I was coaching competitive athletes. And the second one was probably what I charged. You could find somebody who charged a lot less than me who could help you become more fit. And it really wasn't my thing. Again, I would encourage more people to be fit and ride a bike just to be fit, if nothing else. That's great. But they're not the people that I coached, and it's not the focus of my career. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with it whatsoever. I wish more people would do it. So it's always a challenge, but you've got to decide what is this athlete's, what are we aiming at for this athlete, and how can I get the athlete to achieve that goal?
Yeah. Now, I don't know how much time we have left, so I will just go with one of my questions because I really want to talk about that. So, Joe, I think we can say that you were probably the first to really, let's say, bring business into coaching. And I say that as a positive thing. Like you were the first one to really make a plan and to do something more than just, like we say, just one-to-one coaching, which of course is the basics. But so do you think that the fact that you came from another business, do you think that helped you? What was the thing that, let's say, gave you the drive to start a business and everything?
Yeah, good question. There were two things behind my decision to become a coach. One was that I had been an athlete all my life up until that point. I started when I was like 12 years old. as a runner. And every team I was ever on, like junior high school, college, I was kind of like an assistant coach. The coaches always kind of took me under their wing, and so I always felt very close to the coaches, and I always felt very close to the sport. In fact, my life revolved around sport. When there wasn't a sport in the wintertime, I would do my own workouts. No coach, I do my own workouts. Did that all winter long. There's lots of reasons behind that, but won't go into all that. But that was kind of my way of seeing the world, and so that was important. Number one, I had a background in athletics and sport, and enjoyed it tremendously, and had a good relationship with coaches all along. In fact, one of my high school coaches is still one of my role models. He was a tremendous coach, and he set the stage for my coaching all the way through many years. And then I became a coach myself, a high school coach, coaching track and field, coaching runners. And I did that for about 7 or 8 years. And so that kind of brought me to coaching from my athletic background. And then I opened a running store. And then I didn't tell you about this, but a couple of years after I opened the running store, I bought the bike store next door to my running store, took down the wall between the two stores. So now I was selling bikes in addition to selling running shoes. So I had a bike store also. And so I began to learn a lot about cycling as I was just beginning to become a cyclist myself, having been a triathlete. And so I developed this business sense, and I learned a lot of things about running a business when I had the running store and the bike store. I learned a lot of things about what business is all about. And then when I decided to start my coaching business a few years after that, I brought all these things together into my coaching business. I ran it as a business, not just as something I did for fun. It was a business for me. I had to make money at doing this. Otherwise, there wasn't any reason to do this. It wasn't easy when I first started to make money at all. In fact, I had lost money for a long time before I finally started becoming profitable. So that was kind of the process I went through to become who I am, if you guess who I could say today, is this process of from athletics to coaching to business to actually working with other coaches on developing their businesses. I've had a business a few years ago where my job was to help other coaches, like a consulting business, to help them grow their businesses. So it's been a long journey, but it's been a lot of fun also.
Yeah, thank you for the answer.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to the end. If I would like to make one final question from my side, an opinion on what do you think that nowadays is overvalued in cycling? Going maybe back to the overabundance of data, or just in general, what do you think that people overhype too much?
Yeah, it's definitely data. It's definitely data. There's no question about that. We're overwhelmed with data anymore. It takes me back to my pre-heart rate monitor days, when when I was running, all we had was what's called rating of perceived exertion, RPE. So in fact, we didn't even have that yet. That didn't come around until 1982, actually. All we really had was words. We would talk to each other, go for a group run. Somebody would say, how's it going? And I would say, well, it feels very easy, or it feels very hard. We would use words like that to communicate intensity with each other. And that forced you to think about what is the sensation of doing this workout right now? What is the sensation I'm experiencing? And we could put it into words. We don't do that anymore. We've gotten away from that. Now we put it into numbers. We put it into what was my heart rate, what was my power, what was my efficiency factor, what was my decoupling, what was my power to weight ratio. It just goes on and on and on and on. We've got all this data anymore, but we no longer talk about the most important thing. The most important thing is, how did you feel? I would rather the athlete, if I didn't have any other information, if I had that, I would be happy with working with an athlete. I would like to have the other stuff because I can learn a lot from it. But if I had to make a choice between all that other stuff and how did you feel, I'll take how did you feel. Because there I can start asking questions about when did the feeling change, and what would you say on a scale of 1 to 10? How hard was this? And all this kind of stuff we get into about feelings, because in a race, in a bike race, that is much more important than your power or your heart rate. In a bike race, a mass start bike race, you do not have time to look at your power meter and make a decision. You got to make a decision right now based on how I feel, not what the power meter says, not what your heart rate monitor says. And we've gotten away from that. We've got to be able to get back to that point again where the athlete says, yeah, I can do this, or no, I can't do this, because of how they feel right now. They're at their limit, or they've still got a couple of points left they could go after. So that's the key thing, is how did you feel?
Yeah, makes sense. I don't know, Simon, do you have any more questions? Or
I'm very happy with the conversation so far. Mattia, if you have some final question from your side, we can probably touch that one too. Or
no, I think I basically, we covered everything that I wanted to know. I just have to say, like, just one final thing that I wanted to say to Joe. A really good thought that I brought home from one of the podcasts you recorded. I don't remember which one that was when you said that people, before you wrote the book, they were telling you, don't write down all your advices, because then people they will not come to you to be coached. And like in my last year, I started a podcast to just spread out all my knowledge about training, and some persons, they were telling the same to me. But now, like, my coaching requests, they just skyrocketed after I started the podcast. And so I have to say thank you for that piece of advice, because it definitely, my coaching, let's call it business, it's not a business yet, but it stepped up after that. And I think it's a really good advice, because if you give to people, then people, they will try to give back to you.
I agree 100%. What you give is always given back. It's never fails. If you don't give, you don't get anything back. Like
exactly.
Clients, for example, if you give to people, people give back to you.
Yeah, true.
Well, then, thanks. I mean, for me, this conversation was inspirational. I had a lot of good messages for me, but also I think for people who listen to this. And it's very nice to see how you experienced 3 years on evolution, because in your words, you can understand, I mean, at least I can see that you were through something and it changed, it improved, it developed in the way that we've came to know now. And again, thank you for this conversation, and we will be looking forward for the next book, because I mean, we're avid readers. I will ignore for the moment the faster after 50, but since I'm not there yet.
Yeah, I get lots of people who read it in their 40s and they're trying to get a head start. But I would hold off.
Again, thank you, and thank you, Mattia, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you both, Simon and
Thank
Mattia.
you.
Good luck. Good luck to you.
Good luck. Thank you.